Maybe it's the prairie kid in me. Wide open fields, endless horizons, all of that. But I'm not much for big cities. Skyscrapers towering overhead, cars jammed bumper to bumper. It's just not my scene. My breath gets a touch short, and my hands get clammy. You can imagine that being crammed in a moving tube, arm to arm with 100 of my new best friends underneath this city, some of the biggest skyscrapers and some of the worst urban congestion in the world, is really not my scene.
This is a rockbound 4 train. The next stop is Wall Street.
As it happens, on this particular Monday morning, it has to be my scene. So, armed with the directions I need, I walk out into New York City, armed with nothing except my microphone, laptop, and a question about my own identity as a performer and a Mennonite that needs an answer. I'm Nolan Kehler, and from Canadian Mennonites Menno Creative Residency, this is A Light on Silence, Performance Art and the Kerchiefed Faith. Episode 2, Mennonites in Brooklyn. Just to get to National Sawdust in Brooklyn's Williamsburg neighborhood is a 45-minute test of claustrophobic endurance. First, walk up to 125th Street towards the subway station, past the open-air market with more fruit than I see at my regular co-op back home, and past an elementary school. I see kids out on the playground, and I can't help but think of the 6 kids in Silent Light, and how they too must have thought their lives were normal, even though they couldn't have been more different. In the distance from the subway station, I can see one of the most famous marquees in the world, the Apollo Theater. It's a reminder of the league that I'm in. And, hardly imagining I could be more nervous, I descend the subway steps for the first time. Mercifully, although it's quite long, the commute from the Upper West Side is relatively simple. A 4-stop ride on the A train down to the intersection of 14th Street and 8th Avenue, just north of Greenwich Village. From there, you switch onto the L train, which takes you 5 stops just across the East River. Brooklyn is a lot more manageable to me than Manhattan. Buildings are a bit more prairie-friendly, although there's still no room to shake a stick between them. I immediately take a wrong turn, and then, realizing my mistake, I turn around, only to get distracted by the prospect of an authentic New York City bagel and a cup of coffee. After wiping the leftover schmear off my face, I set off in the right direction towards National Sawdust. Compared to the houses and stores that line the streets around it, complete with their classic brownstone architecture, National Sawdust stands out like a firework. A huge mural outside bursts with vibrant colors, framing a quote on its northeast-facing wall. The quote reads, "Later, in the more perfect society, someone else, made just like me, is certain to appear and act freely." I make the mental note to look this up later. After figuring out which door is open, I walk inside. National Sawdust is simultaneously understated and overwhelming. It only seats around 140 people, only a few rows of chairs on the main floor, with another row of chairs lining a balcony that faces the stage. What it doesn't have in space, though, it makes up for in design, with a visually arresting stage setup and a backdrop to match the energy of the mural outside. It also has a multi-dimensional sound system so sophisticated that the audience will be rattled in their seats.
Alright, that is 171 and 172 at 0. Part it out so it doesn't pop at the end of the cue.
Wait, why do we have two separate cues before then? I'm confused.
We had the neon and house light out, and then we had the sculptural out with the video up.
It's here that I meet some of the people who are responsible for putting Silent Light together for the first time. First, there's Paola.
My name is Paola Prestini. I'm a composer, but also the co-founder of the space we're in, National Sawdust. I'm originally from Italy, and I was raised on the Arizona-Mexico border.
Paola is impeccably fashionable and incredibly kind. She's given me her own seat for the opening of the show in a couple of days. Not bad, considering we've only ever sent a handful of emails back and forth. She's kind of like your trendy aunt, who has the coolest job in the world, even though it's hard for you to put your finger on what she actually does. Paola started National Sawdust back in 2015 as an incubator for new works that regularly push the boundaries of classical music. Alongside some of the biggest names in the modern classical music scene, the theater also welcomes modern R&B, hip-hop, folk, and almost every other genre you can think of.
Yeah, I mean, in general, we do a lot more experimentation. So, like, things that are, a little bit out of the box are things that you see here. So, for example, in Silent Light, you have live Foley, you have a lot of electronics, you have a lot of spatialization of the sound, which is not that you can't do that in other places, but often spaces aren't really equipped, if you will, to do all that. Either, because of the technology or because of the people factor. So a lot of the things that we do here tend to be generally not staged. So something that's very special about this piece is it's fully staged. But when we have done operatic workshops or operas, it's always with an edge. It's always something that is slightly different, is slightly contemporary in its staging or in its story or in its music. Do a lot of work by women and gender marginalized composers, and a lot of kind of work that defies the boundaries. So things that you can't say is in a specific style.
For all of the sounds of silence that exist in the movie version of Silent Light, I find it funny that a production that centers on Mennonites from Mexico can have edge. But, unlike me, Paola did not feel the urge to check the laundry when she first saw the film.
When I watched the movie by Carlos Regadas, it was stunning. The story was stunning. The lives of these people were stunning. The love story was stunning. And then also the film had no sound. And so it just seemed like this perfect canvas to be able to paint onto.
You've talked about that canvas before, and the emotional canvas of the characters. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that they're all, I mean, like all human beings, very complex characters that are trying to adhere to, if you will, to the guidelines of their faith, and when Johann, our principal character, doesn't, the crisis that occurs internally for him, and then what it does to his wife is stunning and heartbreaking. And so I think the fact that it brings in this element of the surreal in terms of what happens to his wife Esther when her heart literally breaks, is the beauty and the magic of theater, but also talks about, what happens when you're betrayed and what happens when you're heartbroken, which I think is, again, not specific to the Mennonites, but to any single human. It's just that it's rendered more interesting, I think, by the fact that they are, again, trying to live within the confines and just the guidelines of their faith.
The universality of the human experience that Paula finds in this very specific story is also something that is observed by the opera's stage director. And I'm going to try not to jangle all these hangers. That's... You are a problem solver. I've noticed it throughout the week. I'm noticing it now.
I'm Thaddeus Strasberger. I'm originally from Tulsa, Oklahoma. I live in London, and I am the director and scenic designer for this production of Silent Light.
Thaddeus's work is usually done in front of exponentially more seats than the one in which Silent Light will be shown on in less than a week, sometimes numbering in the hundreds of thousands. But the size of stage doesn't matter when it comes to his work.
Everything I do starts with the human experience and the stories that we want to tell. And you just have to change the sort of techniques that you use to make that happen. Here, instead of expanding things out and amplifying it, oftentimes we're doing the opposite. We're sort of we're zooming in on something that you can see so subtly, and the work with the singers and the cast is about doing less and thinking more. If you're doing it on a big opera stage, oftentimes I also work in big outdoor venues, and it's all about telegraphing all of the emotions outward. In this case, I feel much more with the audience so close to us, which are just a few meters away, that we can really do things to draw the audience in. So in the end, we're trying to do the same thing, and the goal is the same, but you have to use a completely different toolkit to accomplish that.
Another creative that is leading the charge on Silent Light with a different toolkit is the man in charge of leading the music.
I'm Christopher Roundtree. I'm the music director for Silent Light, and I'm a conductor, and I live in Los Angeles, California.
A seasoned champion of contemporary classical music, Christopher has a unique skill set in the genre. It's even earned him a Grammy nomination. Even the way he talks about music is quite different from any conductor that I've ever known.
That is like the wind will become cicadas, or it's like a very open sound, and it's sounds that are not notated like notes and rhythms like we're used to. They're sounds that are more explorations. And this piece has those littered throughout it. It's like the marble, the kind of the grains that run through the stone. So it's a very, very interesting thing, and I think it lends the piece a special shape and a special kind of countenance, which is this thing where we can feel the emotions rumbling below the surface, and sometimes we have a scene and they peek out above the top, and then they kind of sink back in and go away again. And it's such a beautiful shape, and one that's very rare in classical music, and certainly rare in opera.
Listening to Christopher describe those emotions beneath the surface, those things that aren't often talked about in my Mennonite contexts, gave me the brightest hope yet that Christopher, Thaddeus, Paula, and Royce Vavrick, the librettist who we met in our first episode, really are taking a genuine interest in this story and, by extension, my culture, not treating it flippantly or carelessly, but really listening and learning about what exactly is a part of that culture. Ask most pew-sitting, Canucksoat-spitting, butter-churning, Braun, Clausen, or Peters what really makes Mennonite culture, and they'll probably tell you that it's singing.
Royce and I did a lot of research on like the right hymns.
Was there, in your research, was there anything that surprised you about the culture that maybe made you have to pivot in how you were approaching the source material, the piece, how you were thinking about the construction of the music?
I think that, you know, there's a few kind of found, like if you will, source material type work that I was dealing with, right? The hymn, the idea also that this is a community that's in Mexico. So it's like already a community that kind of lives differently, right, from the outside world, and then it's a community that speaks a different language from the actual world they're in, and in a very kind of different cultural landscape. So that was interesting to me, and I think that's why I began playing with this idea of textures. So the piece kind of, as we were mentioning, lives in this landscape of loops and of drones and of complex harmonic structure, and then it lives in these very powerful, beautiful, simple lines. And so that's kind of how I approached, if you will, the material. I know it sounds abstract, but that's kind of how I thought about it.
Listening to Paula talk about a texture to capture the world of the Mexican Mennonites is captivating. It's the difference between capturing the culture in an oil painting as opposed to a photograph. It's brushstrokes, not pixels. Gestures, not resolution. For Royce, this type of artistic rendering lends itself to another lens: empathy.
So this is not the story of all Mennonites. My goodness. This is a very particular story. But I have a feeling that these feelings, I would be, how do I want to phrase this? I bet that there are a good number of people who have experienced this type of triangle, or just this sort of desire, or this idea that we've lived our life and all of a sudden we believe that spiritually God has given us something different, or suggested that maybe there's an alternative path that we're meant to go on. And how does one wrestle with faith when they do want to? I do believe that centrally Johann he wants to do what's right. And so what do you do when you believe that spiritually something else is right, but it comes at the expense of a lifetime that you've built? I feel like a lot of people, whether it's through a sort of relationship sort of thing, or careers, or just life's purpose, the idea of a midlife crisis happens to so many people that I think that that they can empathize with this character. And so it wasn't so much me having to readjust the way that I viewed the Mennonite life or lifestyle. It was more me coming to this landscape and these characters with an open heart, and allowing their story to sing.
This approach is something that Thaddeus channels into his direction as well.
I don't think that this production is in any way a documentary. I think that there are lots of details that are not correct. You know, you're talking about the hair and the costumes and the way things look and the way they work and props, and there's so many things, but I really didn't want to make a documentary. I wanted to create something that was inspired by a situation, but then also to give a kind of liminal feeling that isn't so rooted in reality that it allows room for lots of metaphor and poetry as well.
Maybe this was a touchstone for my own discomfort. In the day-to-day life of growing up in small-town Manitoba, amongst the daily grind of agriculture and industry that stretches across seasons, years, and lifetimes, there isn't a lot of room for the poetic or the metaphorical. Maybe all Mennonites could appreciate about a rendering of their own existence is a documentary, a mirror held up to their life that shows them exactly how they are. As satisfying as that might be to see, Thaddeus thinks that that would actually be harder.
So I think that actually it would be much more difficult, in a sense, you would have to have a lot more money and a lot more time to make sure that everything is like academically documentary proof, so that then the human story could be told without anything distracting you from that. I think we're much freer in this, that we're loosely inspired by an idea of the situation, and it can be much more poetic. And maybe to get the right shoes would cost $100 more to get them shipped from the place, and that's not really the point of this presentation here right now. We could all do our research. We research things all the time and get them, bang on right, for period productions and things. But I think that would be very, very important to have that level of authenticity. However, if you were a Mennonite community watching this production, you might not have the diversity of thought of seeing what this community looks like from the outside, and you would have a very different experience.
So, given the diversity of the creative team for Silent Light, I wondered what they read into the story and the culture that they're presenting. For Thaddeus, it's the value of community.
I mean, in these tight communities, what binds them together, I think, is the most sort of pressing question to me. We have so many abilities. You can buy a plane ticket now and go anywhere in the world. So if you are choosing to stay in a relatively isolated, closed community, you must find some value in it. And if you don't find any value in it and you're being coerced into it, there must be a sort of the community aspect that's pressuring you to value this idea of the evil of disunity over the sort of the collective experience. So that was something that was important to me, and understanding why does Johann or Marianne or Esther stay in this situation? Like, what are the binding things?
Royce also takes that idea of community and sees its relatability with the geographic contexts of National Sawdust in Williamsburg and beyond.
I just had this sort of brain explosion happen that it's interesting that National Sawdust is so close to the Hasidic neighborhood. South Williamsburg is right there. And so it's on this edge of another community that is very insular and that we understand but we don't understand, or and so just the proximity to the Hasids is really fascinating. I really think that art has the opportunity to make us come together, especially in a communal environment like that, and to force us to empathize collectively. And I think that there's something really powerful in asking people to come with open hearts and to experience something that they may never have access to. And I don't know what the entitlement to access is, but there is something really, really wonderful about opening up an experience for people to come and put themselves in another person's shoes for a few minutes, especially right now.
That connection across cultures, across faiths, is something that Christopher speaks to more directly than the others. It comes from his own personal experience.
I grew up in a spiritual path called Siddha Yoga, it's kind of, it's close to Kashmir Shaivism, it's close to Hinduism. Both my parents did that through the 70s, the 80s. And there's an ashram in Los Angeles where I was there 3 days a week, singing and chanting. And the chanting's much different. We don't sing in 4-part harmony. We generally all sing the melody. They're called satsangs. In the satsangs, the men and the women are sitting on opposite sides of the room, and they call and response. So the men will sing and the women will sing, but we're all singing the same melody. But so I grew up with this kind of structure and this thing about community singing. And when I kind of became a classical musician, I just realized at some point that I wanted all my experiences with music to be somehow related to this really communal shared experience. And so much of classical music is actually about boundaries. It's about who's good at music and who's bad at music. I mean, that's very judgmental of me to say that, but something like that, who are the trained people and who are not trained. And there's all these hierarchies, and I feel like that pure music making in the context of spirituality doesn't have those hierarchies in the same way. And so I've tried to really bring that into my practice of making new classical music.
Christopher and the rest of the creative team have all given me a lot to think about. How to broaden horizons beyond what an opera stereotypically is, and the power that it has to convey stories. In this case, in a sense, my story. How to explore moral turpitude in a community with empathy, free of judgment and dogma. How to break down boundaries so that the music, the story, the conversation can ring freely and honestly. As I walk away from National Sawdust on that first day, back toward that intimidating subway line and that shop with the tasty bagels, now long closed, I look back at the quote painted on the wall. Later, in the more perfect society, someone else, made just like me, is certain to appear and act freely. It runs through my mind as I walk back into the rows of cramped houses and bumper-to-bumper traffic, back onto that slightly less cramped L train that takes me back into Lower Manhattan, back on the A train, up towards the couch where I'm sleeping. When I get back to the apartment, I look up what the words mean and discover that it's from a poem by the Greek poet Constantine P. Cavafy called Hidden Things. The poem goes like this. Let them not seek to discover who I was, from all that I have done and said. An obstacle was there that transformed the deeds and the manner of my life. An obstacle was there that stopped me many times when I was about to speak. Only from my most imperceptible deeds and my most covert writings, from these alone will they understand me. But perhaps it isn't worth exerting such care and such effort for them to know me. Later, in the more perfect society, surely some other person created like me will appear and act freely. As others create my community on stage in the coming days leading up to the opening of Silent Light, I cannot help but wonder if the empathy shown by the creative team and those who will appear on the stage will be more perfect, more free than how I feel about myself and the umbrella of my culture.